The courtroom clock struck 9 a.m., and the seats were already full. At the front table sat Danielle Hart, 34 years old, mother of 2, and an ER nurse still wearing her faded blue scrubs. Her hair was tied back in a loose bun. Her ID badge still clipped to her side. Her sneakers worn down from the 12-hour night shift she just finished, running trauma codes, comforting families, saving strangers. She hadn't had time to go home. She came straight to court. This hearing wasn't optional. It was to determine partial custody of her kids, challenged by an ex-husband who'd recently lawyered up and claimed she was emotionally unstable and unavailable to parent. Danielle had documentation. She had witnesses. But what she didn't expect was the moment the judge saw her. Judge Lenora Barron, 62, sharp-suited and always meticulous, looked up from her bench, scanned the room, and then froze, eyes locked on Danielle's scrubs. "Miss Hart," voice clipped, "are you under the impression that this is a hospital?" Danielle blinked. "No, Your Honor. I just finished a shift. I came straight here." Judge Barron raised an eyebrow. "This is a courtroom, not a break room. You are expected to dress appropriately." A low murmur moved through the courtroom. Danielle's lawyer began to speak, but the judge cut him off. "Save it. Miss Hart, you are presenting yourself before this court in a child custody case, and you show up in what amounts to pajamas?" Danielle sat straighter. The courtroom gallery looked on, some shocked, some embarrassed for her. But Danielle? She didn't shrink. She looked the judge in the eye and said softly, "With respect, Your Honor, these pajamas still have blood on them. It's not mine. It belongs to the 7-year-old I helped pull back from cardiac arrest at 4:17 this morning. I didn't have time to change. I just had time to choose, save a life or be 5 minutes late to change clothes for you." The courtroom froze. Judge Barron opened her mouth to speak, but this time she couldn't because the truth had entered the room, and it was wearing scrubs. You could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights as the silence stretched. Judge Barron stared down from the bench, lips pressed tight. She hadn't expected pushback. Not from someone in blue polyester and sneakers with half-tied laces. Danielle didn't flinch. Her voice was steady. Her hands, still marked from IV tape, gloves, and the ink of the trauma board from the ER. Her lawyer, Matt Lister, looked from her to the judge, stunned into silence himself. But the courtroom gallery, the dozen or so strangers, interns, clerks, even the opposing side, wasn't still. People leaned forward. One woman near the back quietly pulled her phone out and started recording. Judge Barron exhaled hard. "This is not a stage for dramatics, Miss Hart." Danielle tilted her head, not disrespectfully, just truthfully. "No, ma'am. It's a courtroom, and I respect it enough to show up, even if it meant not changing out of what I wore to save someone's son." The judge's gavel slammed once sharp. "Let's proceed." But it was too late. Outside that courtroom, the first clip had hit TikTok. Nurse scolded for wearing scrubs to court. Her reply? Pure dignity. It exploded. By the time court recessed for lunch, the video had 600,000 views. By 2 p.m., it had over 5 million. Danielle's voice was all over Twitter. "Save a life or change for you? I chose the life." Hashtags began to trend. "Let her wear scrubs," "Nurse Justice," "Respect the uniform." Local news caught it by 3 p.m. By dinner, national anchors were playing the clip on evening broadcasts. But back in that courtroom, Danielle had no idea. She wasn't tracking views, she was watching the clock. Because after this hearing, she had to pick up her daughter from school in the same scrubs. The same scrubs that now carried more than blood. They carried a story. And the next time she stood to speak, the courtroom wouldn't be silent out of shock. It would be silent out of reverence. The opposing counsel, Mr. Lowell Grant, a slick private attorney dressed in tailored gray with cufflinks that probably cost more than Danielle's monthly rent, stood up and approached the podium. He smirked. Not cruel, just the kind of smirk that oozes entitlement. "Miss Hart, can you confirm that you voluntarily chose to work a night shift before your court appearance today?" Danielle nodded. "Yes, I did." "Knowing full well that you had a custody hearing this morning?" "Yes." "So would it be fair to say that you prioritize your work over preparing for your case, over your children?" A low, sharp intake of breath rippled from the gallery. Danielle didn't blink. She leaned slightly forward in her chair, hands clasped together. "No, sir. I prioritize the life of a stranger's child. Because if it were my child coding on a table at 4 a.m., I'd want someone to stay too. I didn't choose between my job and my children. I chose to be the kind of mother I'd want to show up if they ever needed saving. Even Mr. Grant paused, but Danielle didn't stop. And for the record, every night I work keeps a roof over their heads. My uniform might not impress this courtroom, but it feeds them, protects them, and pays for the therapy they needed when their father walked out. A few in the gallery murmured. A woman dabbed her eyes with a tissue. Judge Barron gripped her gavel, but didn't strike it. She just watched, and for the first time all morning said nothing. Mr. Grant cleared his throat. You're clearly emotional. That's understandable. But, Danielle spoke again, quietly, I'm not emotional. I'm exhausted. But there's a difference. One comes from weakness. The other from doing everything you can to hold a family together while the world calls you unfit for not having time to iron your blouse. And just like that, the case shifted. Not in verdict, but in energy. Because in a room built to measure evidence, procedure, and appearance, someone had just reminded everyone what real strength looks like. And it looked a lot like blood-stained scrubs, 2-day-old mascara, and a woman who didn't apologize for showing up real. After Danielle's defense, the courtroom sat in that uneasy stillness, where decorum battles with conscience. Mr. Grant quietly returned to his seat, flipping through pages that suddenly seemed useless. Judge Barron called for a recess, but as the bailiff began ushering people out, Danielle's lawyer stood. Your Honor, if I may, before recess, I'd like to call our witness. Judge Barron sighed. You may proceed. The doors opened, and in walked Dr. Leah Morales, Chief of Emergency Medicine at St. Joseph's Regional Hospital. Early 50s composed, crisp white coat over her business attire. She walked straight to the witness stand with no notes, no hesitation. Danielle looked up, eyes wide. She hadn't known her chief was coming. Dr. Morales was sworn in, then looked directly at the bench. I'm here to clarify what Danielle Hart does, because it seems her scrubs were mistaken for laziness or disrespect. The courtroom tensed. Judge Barron straightened slightly. Morales continued. Danielle Hart is the nurse I call when the new ones freeze in trauma. She's the nurse who holds the hands of dying children while their parents are stuck in traffic. She's the one who skipped lunch 26 days in a row last spring so the others could eat. She didn't wear scrubs to insult the court. She wore them because she stayed to stabilize a child who stopped breathing, then ran out the door to fight for custody of her own. She turned toward the judge now, voice steady. If you think that is disrespect, then I recommend every robe in this building visit a trauma ward on a Friday night. Silence. The court reporter stopped typing. Judge Barron blinked. Then Dr. Morales pulled out a folded note. Your Honor, I'd also like to enter into the record this letter, written by the parents of the boy Danielle saved this morning. They learned where she went after the code. They wrote this in the waiting room. She handed the note to the clerk. It was short, just 4 lines. To whom it may concern, if Danielle Hart had not stayed past her shift, our son would not be breathing. Give her children back. She's earned them 100 times over. You could hear people sniffle across the gallery. Judge Barron didn't say a word. Not yet. But something behind her eyes cracked, and even the gavel seemed reluctant to break the moment. Danielle, still seated, wiped her eyes, not from weakness, but because someone finally spoke the truth she didn't know how to ask for. And the courtroom would never be the same again. The courtroom recessed for lunch, but no one left talking about custody rights or legal technicalities. They were talking about her. The nurse in scrubs, the mother who stood tall, the woman who chose a child's heartbeat over courtroom etiquette, and ended up showing the entire legal system what actual grace under pressure looks like. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered, dozens of nurses, EMTs, even 2 firefighters still in turnout gear. Word had spread. The clip had gone national. By 12:45 p.m., Fox News was airing a segment titled, The Scrubs Heard Round the Country. CNN's lower third read, ER nurse shamed for uniform, stuns court with final defense. Danielle Hart's words had become a rallying cry, not because they were loud, but because they were real. Inside, Judge Barron sat in her chambers. She'd requested the full transcript of the morning session. She was rereading Danielle's statements, line by line, not as a judge, as a mother. And it stung. Because beneath the polished veneer of her courtroom control, there was a woman who had never been forced to choose between saving someone else's child and protecting her own. And now she had presided over a woman who did both in the same hour. Danielle, meanwhile, sat on a bench in the hallway with a half-eaten granola bar and her lawyer beside her. "You okay?" Matt asked. She nodded. "I'm not trying to be a symbol." He looked at her and said, "You're not. Symbols are quiet. You're just true." She smiled faintly. "Truth's messy." Matt shrugged. "So are scrubs." Down the hall, a young court clerk approached her timidly. "Ma'am, my mom's a nurse. I just wanted to say thank you for not changing. Not for us. Not for anyone." Danielle didn't respond with a speech. She just placed a hand gently on the girl's shoulder and said, "Your mom's a hero. I just wore the uniform today." By the time court resumed, the gallery had tripled. People stood in the back. A group of nurses lined the wall in silent solidarity. When Judge Barron re-entered, she paused, scanning the crowd. Her gavel struck once. "This court is back in session." But her voice, firm and measured just hours before, now carried something else. Respect, because a woman in scrubs had walked into her courtroom and shown her what honor really looked like. Judge Barron sat taller than anyone in the room, elevated, robed, authoritative. But for the first time that day, she didn't feel elevated. She felt seen, exposed. Not by Danielle Hart, not by the witnesses, but by the truth they had dragged, unwillingly, into her courtroom. As the gavel echoed and the chatter quieted, she cleared her throat. "Before we proceed to closing arguments, the court has reviewed the transcript, the documentation, and the testimony offered this morning." She looked directly at Danielle. "Miss Hart, you said something earlier, that you didn't choose between your job and your children. You chose to be the kind of mother you'd want to show up if your child ever needed saving." A pause. That line stayed with me. The gallery didn't move. Everyone was holding their breath. This court prides itself on maintaining decorum. But I failed to recognize that true decorum is not appearance. It is sacrifice without complaint. And what you demonstrated here in the very uniform I disrespected was precisely that. She turned to the court reporter. "Strike all previous commentary regarding Miss Hart's attire from the record. Permanently." Whispers rippled across the gallery. The judge wasn't done. This courtroom has seen polished liars and well-dressed frauds. Today we saw someone show up after saving a child's life, only to be shamed for not dressing up for us. Miss Hart, I owe you not just an apology, but gratitude. The gallery stood, not from cue, not from performance, from truth, one by one. First a nurse in the back, then a court clerk, then every spectator, lawyers, bailiffs, even the opposing attorney rose, eyes low, head bowed. Danielle sat frozen, then slowly rose to her feet too. But she wasn't standing for herself. She was standing with them. Judge Barron's voice cracked, barely, but it cracked. "Let the record reflect. This court recognizes that strength does not always wear a suit. Sometimes it wears scrubs, walks in late, and still holds the world together." In that moment, the courtroom was not divided by robes and benches, titles and rules. It was unified by a woman who didn't yell, didn't fight, didn't argue. She showed up, bloody, tired, real. And that was enough to make even a gavel bow its head. The courtroom was still standing when Danielle sat down. The nurses lining the walls stayed quiet, holding their positions like soldiers. Even the bailiff, normally rigid, stood straighter, as if somehow he'd been reminded what justice was supposed to protect. Judge Barron looked to both attorneys. "Closing arguments. You may proceed." But Danielle's lawyer, Matt Lister, simply stood and said, "Your Honor, I believe my client already gave hers through her actions, and the testimony of her supervisor, the letter from the boy's family, and the response from this courtroom have said what I never could." He nodded and sat. Lowell Grant, the opposing counsel, hesitated. He looked over at Danielle, tired, hair frizzed, scrubs wrinkled, eyes focused, and something shifted. The smirk was gone. His voice lowered. "I withdraw my final argument. The evidence is clear." Gasps, then silence. Grant turned toward the gallery and then back to the judge. "I've represented dozens of cases like this, but this is the first time I felt ashamed for doing so. Miss Hart, I was wrong." Danielle blinked. No words came. Neither did tears. She was past tears. This wasn't a TV drama. This was her life. And for the first time in what felt like years, she didn't feel like she was defending it. She felt like it was being seen. Judge Barron folded her hands. I've rendered a decision. The room froze. Full physical and legal custody shall remain with Miss Danielle Hart. There is no evidence, legal or moral, to suggest these children would be better served elsewhere. The court recognizes not just Miss Hart's sacrifice, but her unshakable stability, consistency, and strength. Danielle closed her eyes, not in drama, in relief. Her life, messy, exhausted, raw, wasn't just enough. It was exactly what her kids needed. The judge continued. This court thanks Miss Hart for reminding us that real justice must serve those who show up, even when they're running on empty. The gallery didn't clap yet. They waited. And then Judge Barron added a final note. And let it be known, from this day forward, nurses appearing in this courtroom after shift will be offered water, not warnings. That's when it happened. One person in the back row started clapping, then another and another, until the room, every last person, rose in thunderous, standing applause. Not for a ruling, not for a victory, for a woman who didn't have time to change, because she was too busy saving someone's life. The applause inside courtroom 3C lasted over a full minute. No gavel silenced it. No bailiff interrupted. Even Judge Barron sat back in her chair, letting the sound wash over the room like a cleansing rain after a long drought. Danielle Hart stood still, not proud, not emotional, just present. The way she always was, whether in a trauma bay, a courtroom, or her daughter's bedroom at night, checking on her breathing while the world judged her from a distance. When the session ended, dozens waited outside. Cameras flashed. Reporters called her name. But Danielle didn't stop for sound bites. She just walked through the crowd, scrubs, sneakers and all, and hugged her children waiting by the courthouse steps. Is it over? Her daughter asked. Danielle smiled. No, sweetheart. It just started. That night, her story hit every major network, but not as a scandal, not as a legal twist, as a reminder. A reminder of what it means to show up when you're tired, to protect what matters when the world tries to measure your worth by polish instead of purpose. Headlines poured in. ABC, judge learns powerful lesson from exhausted nurse. NBC, ER scrubs and sacred ground. One mom stand in court. Daily Mail, nurse scolded for scrubs leaves courtroom in standing ovation. Hashtags kept trending. Nurse and scrubs, Danielle Hart, respect the real. Hospitals across the country held a Scrubs Day, where staff were encouraged to wear their uniforms proudly, no matter where they went. Someone made shirts with Danielle's quote, "Save a life or change for you? I chose the life." One national TV anchor choked up reading her closing statement aloud live on air. But Danielle? She didn't watch. She was folding laundry, helping with math homework, heating leftovers. When a neighbor dropped off a stack of news clippings and said, "You're everywhere," Danielle shrugged. "I don't want to be everywhere. I just want to be where I'm needed." That night, her daughter asked, "Will they forget?" Danielle wrapped her arm around her and replied, "They might forget my name, but they won't forget what we showed them. That being strong doesn't mean being loud. It means being there, especially when it's hard." The crosswalk still blinked outside. Night settled in, and across the country, a quiet army of nurses tucked their kids in bed, set alarms for early shifts, and laid out scrubs, prouder than ever to wear them. 3 weeks after the ruling, Danielle received a call from someone she never expected, the curator of the State Museum of American Labor and Service. "Miss Hart," the woman said, "we'd like to request the pair of scrubs you wore to court for a permanent exhibit." Danielle blinked. "You want my scrubs?" "Yes, ma'am. We want them displayed next to the firefighter boots from 9/11 and the miner's helmet from Appalachia. Because what you did wasn't just about law. It was about showing up for a country that too often forgets who holds it together." Danielle hesitated. She looked down at the folded, laundered scrubs tucked in a drawer, still faintly stained, still bearing the weight of that day. They weren't just fabric. They were part of the moment she stopped defending herself and started defining something bigger. She mailed them in silence. The museum created a plaque beside the display that read, "The scrubs that showed up." Worn by Nurse Danielle Hart. After a 12-hour shift, she stood in a courtroom and reminded the world that strength doesn't wear a suit. It wears fatigue, grace, and purpose. Soon, schools took field trips to see the exhibit. A teacher in Chicago created a curriculum unit titled Modern Courage, the people who don't shout but change everything. Danielle received thousands of letters, from other nurses, from single moms, from exhausted dads, teenagers, even a federal judge who simply wrote, "I used to measure professionalism by polish. You reminded me to measure it by sacrifice." Still, Danielle didn't seek interviews. She returned to night shifts, kissed foreheads, showed up, until one day she was walking her daughter to school, and the little girl turned and said, "When I grow up, I'm going to wear scrubs too." Danielle knelt down, zipped her backpack, and whispered, "Wear whatever you want. Just make sure you show up for the people who need you." The girl nodded. And in that simple exchange, beneath blue skies and crossing guards, another seed was planted. Because when the world stood and clapped, it wasn't for courtroom drama. It was for someone who showed up covered in blood and love, and never once asked to be applauded for it. It wasn't long before Danielle Hart's story reached Capitol Hill. A bipartisan group of lawmakers, inspired by her viral courtroom moment and public support, introduced a new resolution, the Hart Standard. A policy ensuring that emergency and medical workers appearing in court after shift cannot be penalized or barred for wearing their professional uniforms. It passed unanimously in 3 states within months. One congressman said on the floor, "She didn't testify to change the law. She testified because she had to, but her courage changed the law anyway." Courtrooms across the country began adding policy clarifications to their decorum rules, specifically allowing scrubs as accepted attire for those called directly from work. One judge wrote in a judicial opinion, "The robe does not give me the right to ask someone who saved a life to apologize for how they look when they stand before me." But back in her hometown, Danielle didn't speak at rallies or sign book deals. She kept living her life the same way she had before. One shift at a time, one scraped knee at a time, one bedtime story at a time. Until the day the mayor declared Nurses Day in their city would officially be renamed Danielle Hart Day. In honor of showing up mourning, her daughter walked into the kitchen holding a school flyer about it and asked, wide-eyed, "They named a day after you?" Danielle smiled, poured her coffee, and replied, "No, honey, they named it after what people like me do. We show up. We don't wait to be perfect. We just go." Her daughter beamed. Outside, the city bells rang. In hospitals across the country, scrubs were worn with just a little more pride. And in courtrooms that once scolded, judges now paused when they saw the color blue. Because when Danielle Hart stood in that room, she wasn't trying to be loud. She was just too tired to pretend, too brave to change, and too devoted to ever walk away from the people she loved, whether they needed medicine or a mother who never missed a hearing.